Welcome to the Foul Out Podcast. Today we have my brother Arkeem, Mr. John, and Mr. JD, as well as myself. And this conversation actually began from an Instagram post on the Ask a Black Man channel, where this question here was proposed.
Is up.
How did Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
How did lower class Black Americans become the face of the Black community? And effectively, for somebody like me, a late stage millennial, this is all I've known my entire life is that there's seems to be a minority of Black people that sort of are the face. They're our brand. However, for the majority of Black people, we know that the majority of us are not like that. We're not the brand that the news tries to say we are. So that's the point of this conversation, to get to the bottom of why this has happened and how we can look to the future on how to change it potentially. So I guess I would like to start with you, Mr. John, since you probably have the most history on the subject. And you also gave a really thoughtful comment under the post. What would you say, like, how did we get here? And like, what was it like historic?
Well, thank you very much, Anthony. Please call me John L. That's what, pretty much everybody, that's pretty much what I go by. And I'll say this, I think to help frame the conversation, I think we have to really look back through history and understand what has happened in the African American culture within the United States, right? So with that, I'm going to start from like the 20s, so to speak. And basically everybody remembers the Great Depression, and your grandparents, your great grandparents, probably a lot of them were keep your money in your mattress, not in the bank. But when the Great Depression happened, a lot of white America lost their shirts. You know what I mean? They lost a lot of money, and African Americans, because we were basically closed out of the financial system back then, banks as well as the stock market, our money survived. So that's when you had areas like Rosewood, Black Wall Street, just to name a few, rose up because everything was cheap because the masses were poor. And therefore, African Americans were able to really expand and grow economically. So, with that being said, I want to go back for a quick second, just a little bit further, to a movie called Birth of the Nation. A lot of people don't know during Reconstruction, African Americans made up a very large percentage of elected officials. So you put those two things together and you're asking, why has African Americans, as far as the image of us, become a caricature? And the reason being is because that is part of the social engineering that this country has put forth. They tried to do it during Jim Crow with the minstrel shows and things of that nature, but because media wasn't as profound as it is today, it didn't really have an opportunity to stick. When you look at organizations like the Black Panthers, when they started out in California, it was a community organization in order to protect African Americans from white police officers who used to do what's called night rides and ride through different areas of California, beating, killing African Americans that they just saw walking the streets. So I'm sorry I got to give you a whole 360 answer on your initial question. I'm not trying to monopolize the mic, but I just want to frame it to understand that in order for the power structure that is in place right now today, it used to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, WASP, right? But then John Kennedy broke that power structure down. So white America, they said, okay, or the power structure said, okay, what we have to do now is open up our ranks to include Irish, to include Italian, to include all these other groups in order to combat against civil rights. A lot of people forget that the March on Washington that Dr. King was the keynote speaker on, if you look at the speaker list, you had every single minority faith leader spoke at that event, because a lot of minorities, Irish, Italian, Polish, when they would try to get employment from the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, the WASP, there were signs hanging in the window. Italian need not apply. this need not apply, Polish need not apply. So I'm saying all this to say they in the late 60s, early 70s, the power structure had to figure out how to break down one of the strongest strongholds within our country, which was the black family unit and the black community. And they were able to do that because, like I said in the post, for every positive, African American show you had on TV, once media became really prolific, there were 10 negative shows. We look at like Good Times and That's My Mama and things of that nature. And media at that point, when you think about the late 60s and early 70s, in the mid 60s, early 60s, every house didn't have a TV. A lot of like the fight that I have here in 1965, a lot of people would go down to the TV stores and sit outside with lawn chairs and watch the fights from the TVs that were in the TV stores because a lot of houses didn't have them. So when the media became more proliferated and everyone got a TV in their house, the power structure said, okay, now here's a perfect delivery mechanism to portray the lazy, the drunkard, the drug addict, the absentee father of the African American community. And through black exploitation films throughout the 70s, they were able to show on a mass level of this is who African Americans really are, which it was not true. But that was the caricature that they tried to put forth about African Americans. And fast forward to 2026, and that one of the things that I mentioned, white on white crime or race on race crime is high amongst all sectors. White on white crime right now, if you check the FBI crime stats, is 91.3%. You don't hear
Yeah.
that in the media, right? The only thing you hear is black on black crime. You don't even hear Asian on Asian crime, which is at 87.5%. And Asians, and I'm saying the whole Asian community, they don't even call the cops. They pretty much relegate themselves in their whole communities. You look at Jewish communities, they have their own police force, especially up in New York and different areas such as that. So therefore, those crime stats don't permeate the media the same way African American crime stats permeate the media. And that is how you have what we see today is if you came from a two-parent household, nobody in your family was ever in jail, you never lived in the hood and all those things. I like to say you're a quote unquote, you're not black enough, right? However, everybody on the negative side, even other races, like you have your Italian mob and your Jewish mob and all those sort of things, they're downtrodden, aren't looked upon as their leaders or the face of their community. All right. And I want to pause there to give everybody else an opportunity to speak because again, I don't want to monopolize the mic, but I think that was or I know that was the beginning of how this caricature of African Americans became so prolific like it is today.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
I want to kick it over to you, JD. Based on everything that he said, do you agree that media's proliferation is a part of what happened? And also, do you think that we as Black people have a role to play in it? Like, did we adopt the things that they showed us on TV that we were?
To answer your last question first, I absolutely think that we have a role to play, and we basically capitulated to what they were doing to us. So, John L., I appreciate the history lesson up until modern times. I want to just name one specific year, and that's 1995. I'm old enough to say I grew up with hip hop. Right? I grew up as it started, and in the beginning, nobody thought that it would do anything. Right? They thought it was a fad. They wouldn't put it on mainstream television, but it was organic because it was from our community. Right? It was our way to express ourselves through music, through rhyme, and it was so new and innovative. It just caught like wildfire. But in the beginning, it was very, very authentic.
Mhm.
And so I want to fast forward to 1995, right? The Million Man March. Most people today, my son is 24 years old and he didn't even know that happened until a few years ago. But essentially, in 1995, a million black men came together from all over the world, all different religions, all different creeds, for peace and for unity. What was also happening during that time, people don't remember this, but the Two Live Crew, right a year before that, had just won a Supreme Court case for freedom of speech so that they could say whatever they wanted to say in their music. Because before that, they would get arrested for cussing on stage. They would get arrested for saying certain things in public. And so the Two Live Crew allowed hip hop to be mainstream and say express whatever we wanted to say on record. And so that was a win. The Million Man March was a win. A lot of people also don't remember that the Crips and Bloods had a truce in the early 90s. At the midst of the crack epidemic, at the height of the most violence that we've ever had, because the 90s was wild, the Crips and Bloods came together to stop the violence. So all of this was happening and it was being expressed through our music. In 1990, the biggest rap record was Fight the Power by Public Enemy. That's a revolutionary song. And in 1995, everybody talks about this. They had this infamous meeting about hip hop and how they wanted to control the message and they wanted to control and filter it and promote negativity. And I look at that year as a delineation point, because if you think about it, the very next year after the Million Man March, or after all of the things that I had just named, and also people don't know this, but Muammar Gaddafi was about to give Minister Farrakhan $1 billion to help the black community.
Mhm.
At the same time, in the United States,
They blocked it.
rejected it. And
Mhm.
so all of this was happening. And then the very next year, what happens? Tupac gets killed. We have the East Coast, West Coast beef, and nobody's talking about unity anymore. And if you look at the trajectory of our music from that time on, it was based in conflict. We had never had rappers get killed based on music before that. And now 30 years later, we rapping about the same stuff, we talking about the same stuff, and basically they have hijacked which was a subset of our culture, and they hijacked it and made that the mainstream image of the black man, and we haven't figured out a way to take it back.
Well said.
Yeah, well said.
Wow, facts. So okay, so when you say they, you mean like the US government or like
So that's a good question because they is a complicated word, but the historical documents justify this. I'm sure everybody has heard of COINTELPRO, right? That is an FBI government funded organization inside of the FBI to destroy and infiltrate black organizations. That certainly didn't stop during the 80s and the 90s. That continued with our music, and there's all kind of evidence to have that. And so if we know about that, we know about propaganda, we know that, right? The powers that be can use media and images, just like John L. said, to control us. They started that stuff in the 20s when they mimicked us from eating watermelons, which was one of the most healthiest fruits that you can eat, right? And they tried to detest us from that. So they started all of this stuff as the media was developing. But then when we created a music that basically was revolutionizing the world, they weaponized that against us. So the answer to they is the people that have always been against us. Right, the same people that were willing to pass Jim Crow, that we forced to overturn I mean, they is the power structure that controls the real estate of all of the places that we live, right? And so you can't say it's one person, but it's the same system that's prevented us from doing anything else, positive for the past 400 years.
Okay.
gotcha.
So I get what you're saying with that, but at some point, where does our people get blamed for it? Because they don't, as somebody who creates content, right? And we have TBG Digital, which is all positive, and it gets great feedback, but it's like our people kind of, they don't want to see the upstand. Look how they treat Russell Wilson for who he is, right? So, and look how they praise Future. Russell Wilson just took Future's biological son to, as a matter of fact, UT, University of Texas, on a college tour. But to a great percentage of our black men, Russell Wilson is somehow a lame, a geek. And that's not the government making them say that. That's their own subconscious mind making them say, hey, if this guy doesn't have dreads, tattoos, a drug addict, and want to, and you know, just down to outright kill somebody, then he's somehow less of a man than this guy who is, you know. And that's what they like to see. You know, that's what they want to see. They don't want to see an upstanding black guy. They don't. You know.
Well, right now we don't have anybody to call that out like we used to. When I was growing up, the old heads would call that out, right? The dudes that was gangsters in the old school, if they knew you was on the right path, they wasn't even gonna let you participate. They're like, man, nah, you know, you got a future. You know what I mean? There was a standard, right? And we've just let the standard go. But I think to your point, that's why we need to re-propagandize ourselves. That starts with content like you have, which is positive, the images that we see, right? All of that stuff we've let them control. How do we get back in control of that image? How do we claim back that narrative? And I mean, I'm sure John L has seen way more than me in terms of that. He has a hip hop channel, so I know he knows kind of how that started, but I would love to hear that too.
Yeah, well, let me just first of all, Anthony, I want you to be able to get in there. This is your podcast. So I don't want to, you know what I mean? I
No, go ahead. This
for a living.
like me and my brother agreed before that y'all have the wealth of knowledge. We really want to listen for the most part.
I got you. Let me pull back a couple things real quick. So you have to really dig deep into when did the face of African Americans change as far as in the broader concept, right? So one of the things that really helped with the narrative that African Americans are criminals and this, that, and the other, believe it or not, and I really hate to say this, was other African Americans. Because when you have upwardly, you got to remember redlining, right? So all four of us, let's just say we all make over $200,000, right? They were forcing us to live next to low income communities. So therefore, when those low income folks were, doing whatever their daily crimes were, they were coming to the closest proximity to them, which was the upwardly mobile African American area. When you look at where white folks put their 10%, because let's just be honest, the preponderance of any culture's criminal element is rarely over 10%, rare. And ours isn't over 10% either. So when you look at where they place white folks who are low income, where do they place them? Out in podunk somewhere where nobody sees them. One of my favorite programs that I like to turn people on to is, and this is real. This isn't some made up thing. This is a real documentary called "The Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia." If you've never seen it, you should watch it, because it's literally about this whole family since their great grandfather that have taken advantage of the system, and they're all white, but they live up in the hills of West Virginia and Appalachia, and the whole town hates them. The cops hate them because all they do is rob, steal, and pillage, right? But it's like a 3 or 4 part series that talk about this family. And their great grandfather taught them how to get on Social Security disability. From the time their kids were born, they would put them on there. So they literally never work. They shoot each other inside their own families. In one of the portions of it, the uncle had just shot the nephew, or the nephew had just shot the uncle, and he was being interviewed like, yeah, if he come back up here again, I'm going to kill him. And so when you think about how the flip is done, right? And the like my old cats used to call it the trick bag, how they put you in the trick bag. You look at shows like Breaking Bad, and I've never watched an episode of Breaking Bad because I just didn't like the premise of it. that here's this dude pushing meth, and he is all of a sudden the great American white hero. Okay. And you have somebody who is doing the exact same thing of a different color, and that person is the scourge of the community. But again, back to the point. So if they put white America right next to trailer parks, the same way redlining put upwardly mobile African Americans next to low income African Americans, you would have white Americans with the same disparaging views of white America, the same exact ones. Because if you have any upwardly mobile white friends, and if you really, really talk to them, or white people that you know, rather, and you really, really talk to them, they'll tell you, oh yeah, I got cousins in Ohio, I got cousins here, there, Arkansas. I don't even talk to them people. They're some backwards, individuals, right? But where are they? Think about, I like using media. I like using things that everybody has seen, right? So think about the movie Christmas Vacation with Chevy Chase. Think about who his crazy white cousin was that lived out in the sticks. Cousin Eddie, right? Cousin Eddie didn't live around, he didn't live around the Griswolds. And every time he came around, the Griswolds hated seeing him. And there's been a mass conflation of African Americans embrace the criminal element within the African American community. And that's vastly
So this the question about that though. Are they giving cousin Eddie a microphone and a record contract and letting him glorify what that looks like out in the sticks so that all of his cousins, you know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying?
I
Like,
do. And
that's what they do to us.
And here's the thing. I would challenge you to go back and look at 70 rock bands. Look at the Ozzy Osbourne rock bands. Look at the Kiss rock bands. Look at those rock bands from the 70s that were on stage biting heads off bats, devil worshiping, all those things. And what media has been successfully able to portray is when a white person does something, it's a singular event to that individual. When an African American does something, it's the African American culture as a whole is painted with the broad brush.
Yeah.
And to your point, JD, yes, cousin Eddie does have a microphone, but unfortunately, it's AM radio. It's not FM. You know, understand what I'm saying? He does have that microphone, right?
Yeah.
Because go ahead, RK.
I just was piggybacking off what you said. I tell him that all the time. The one thing that the media gives white people is individualism. They don't give black people that. It's all of y'all, right?
Yep.
And the black
Yeah.
man, yeah. But you go ahead.
And think about this, and I'm going to leave my point on this. I'm sure each of us have traveled to different states and different cities throughout our lifetime. Whatever state you go to in the United States, the inner city, right, is located right next to the financial power of that particular city. Ask yourself why. They want everybody to drive past the hood to be able to point a finger and say, that's the problem right there. That is where the problem is. That's why if you look at every city, right around the city limits, you're going to have poverty. You're going to have the projects. Now, ask yourself, these people living in trailer parks, because there's a plethora of trailer parks throughout this country. There are more trailer parks throughout this country than there are inner city projects by a factor of 10 easily. But why do they not put those white folks on welfare in the inner city next to the city hub where everybody goes to work? Because they want them out of sight, out of mind. So therefore, when the media talks about crime and you were driving to work this morning and you saw some dilapidated public city, some public housing, you automatically think that's where the crime is coming from. And they're going to overpopulate that area with low income people because I don't care, be it man or beast, you can put a bunch of cats in a small room with one piece of fish. They'll kill each other for it. I'm from Pittsburgh, PA, right? And before I moved out of Pittsburgh, PA in 95, after I got out of the Marine Corps in 91, I literally went to an interview for the post office. It was supposed to be for African Americans. This is, you're going to, for veterans and other African Americans as a whole. There were over 80 people who showed up for 2 positions. So that automatically makes me and JD competitors. That makes me and Arkeem a competitor. That makes me and Anthony a competitor. So therefore, now that we are going to fight against each other to feed our families, whether it's legal money or illegal money, because they're pitting us against each other. When you think about Ollie North and the Iran-Contra affair, when the federal government got caught buying cocaine from the Sandinistas for the Contras, or excuse me, from the Contras to help them, they had to put a face to where because they got caught. Ollie North was on Capitol Hill. They got caught. But they had to put a face to say, oh no, Ollie North was just, he was so high up, he had no idea what was going on. So they created the crack epidemic to put a black face on what the federal government did in supporting the Iran-Contra affair. That's how the crack epidemic even started. Because you think about it, cocaine in the 80s, that was some bread. A key of cocaine in the 80s was $45,000, $47,000. Black folks
Yeah,
weren't,
no, everything about Snowfall, absolutely.
yeah,
That stuff really happened.
Yeah.
black folks
It's
wasn't
all
doing
in the
cocaine.
documents.
Black folks weren't doing cocaine in the 80s until the Iran-Contra affair. So they had to put a black face on that crime.
And you're right. I don't know if you ever heard of the experiment. It's called the behavioral sink. Well, they changed it to something like 25 Universe 25, but it's by John Calhoun. He was a scientist. It was like over in Europe, and he did an experiment with rats. Right, just like you said with the cats, he did an experiment with rats in the late 50s, early 60s, and he would put 2 rats in close proximity, then 6, then 12, then 24, and he would limit the food. And then after he limited the food so much, the rats began to kill each other after so many in such a small proximity. Because when it was just a few of them, they didn't kill each other. They ate, they took turns, and they, lived their everyday life. But when so many of them come, and that's what happens in inner city when they smush so many people together, they
With limited
understand that,
resources.
yeah,
Yep.
limited resources, they understand that begets violence.
Yep. And
And
that's why they create food deserts. So all of them neighborhoods, you can never find a grocery store, you can never find the basic needs until you go outside of those neighborhoods. And so now you're absolutely right. And so that's why I always say the system is actually the environment, right? They don't really make you do anything. They just curate the environment, and they know statistically, like you said, okay, we've tested all of these rats, we tested all 80% of the time, if we make the environment like this, 80% of them are going to do this. So we don't have to worry about them. Now we only have to focus on the 20% who aren't affected by this stimulus, who aren't affected by this environment, who aren't affected by coming outside and seeing people selling drugs and doing this. Now we only got to focus on that 20% because the 80% already caught up in the environment. And so my question is always, okay, of the 20% who are not affected, how do we connect ourselves? How do we, because we all doing it by ourselves right now. Every successful black man I know, he out on the island by himself and he done made it happen and figured it out. But how do we connect that so that we're not just all fighting the dragon by ourselves and connect those networks and connect? Because there's a reason why we got to say bye black. Because subconsciously, we've been taught not to support one another. So we have to reinforce it with the language. Asian people don't have to say bye Asian, right? You don't hear Hispanics saying people bye, bye. They just, it's ingrained in them. And so how do we recreate that type of mindset where it's subconscious? Right? I see you. Listen, I don't know. I ain't never met you before, but I got you. You know what I mean? We have this understanding where of how we greet one another, of how we talk to one another, of how we interact with one another that doesn't necessarily have to be verbal. Because if all of our problems are on public discourse, now our enemy knows how to destroy us. You know what I mean? So those are the kind of things I think about in terms of how we can combat this. Because if we are just victims of the environment, then we're not gonna ever change anything. We have to, almost like the Underground Railroad, right? They had their own form of communication outside of the system where they could communicate and be able to share resources and information and knowledge and wisdom without the enemy knowing about it, right? That's what we need to recreate in this new digital system where they basically monitoring everything. And all we do is talk about our problems publicly so our enemy knows what to do. And so I
What
don't
I
know, I'm going off on a rant, but that's just,
nah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was saying you're not going off on a rant. You made, several good points. And the term that I'll give you is social engineering. KRS-One had a famous quote. He said, "If hip hop can destroy, hip hop can create." And I cut up his quote for the sake of brevity. But if hip hop can destroy, hip hop can uplift. And again, the term is social engineering. Everything that we're talking about is social engineering. So now, how do we use the social engineering to our benefit? There is a gentleman up in New York. Can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was a principal of either a middle school or an elementary school. I can't remember off the top of my head. And what he started doing was right in his school, the first things that he started implementing was he started working with the young black males, the young African American males, excuse me, within his school. And he set up a laundry program, right? So these kids can come to school, get their laundry done. He set up a haircut thing inside of the school. And that was the first year. By year 5, year 7, he literally transformed 7 blocks around his school. He opened up his school for job placement training for the parents of the students at his school. He opened up the school for GED assistance for these parents, mental health assistance for these parents. Because let's just be honest, I don't know about you all's upbringing, but my upbringing was a little bit of, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But the point being is, being low income is hard. It is hard to be poor in this country. And the psychological warfare that comes from being in a low income situation, especially in this country, is far worse than any other country. So therefore, if you have a kid, 6 years old, 7 years old, very impressionable, especially at a very early age, and all they see is negativity, it's just like trying to grow a flower, right? You try to grow a tree, you got to give it the right nutrients and the right, everything in order for it to grow healthy. Well, the reverse is true as well. If you put that flower, you put that tree into a bad system, because it's natural, it's going to grow, but is it going to be healthy? Is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to grow straight? Is it going to reach its ultimate potential? And that's what the social engineering has done within the African American community. It has cut us off from our actual, and I hate to use this word, but our own replacements, which is our youth. Our youth is our replacement, right? And if we're not able to bring up our youth in a certain way to make our culture sustainable, then we're hustling backwards. So to answer your question, JD, and the larger question of what do, we turn that social engineering paradigm on its ear and really start getting at these young folks, really start getting in the ears of these young folks. Because like you said, JD, excuse me, hip hop, I like to say I slapped hip hop on the ass when it was born. And when it first came out, highly uplifting. One of my favorite crews of the early 90s was X-Clan. One of my favorite individual rappers was Paris, right? Because they were talking about real life substantial change. But you got to remember, the same way folks burnt down Black Wall Street and they burnt down Rosewood, the same way those things happened because African Americans were thriving is the same thing that's happening on a broader scale. Because what have we seen since civil rights? People got to remember, we're only one generation away from civil rights. People don't really let that permeate in their head. My mom had to drink from a black water fountain.
So
You
to
know,
your point with that, my uncle was a freedom rider.
there you go.
I have pictures of him getting spit on. He
Hmm.
was beaten in Mississippi. They had a $10,000 bounty on his head.
That's where we
He
from,
died. He
Mississippi.
Wow.
died at 30
Yeah,
years
we're
old
from
from a
Miss.
heart attack.
We're from Mississippi.
Yeah, my
So
my
so he
dad grew up in segregated South.
Have
okay.
you ever
So yeah, he
heard
was in Jackson. He was in Jackson, Mississippi.
you ever heard the Jackson State tragedy when the military came on campus and shot at
Yes.
the girls' dorm? My dad was one of those people. He dodged the bullets. Yeah.
You see, so that's what I'm saying. It's one generation, like you just said, it's one generation before us.
So what
And
happened to derail us? You gotta really hone in on that piece, because if I know I'm trying to tie my shoe and I can't tie my shoe because my right index finger is broken, I got to get that right index finger fixed so I can tie my shoe properly. So we
I'll
have to
say it
hone
like
in.
this.
Go ahead,
I
Anthony.
think it was John Hope Bryant that I heard say it, but he said Africans have high self-esteem but lower confidence, and African Americans have lower self-esteem and higher self-confidence. Higher self-confidence because we're in America, and we made it through slavery, etc., to get here, but lower self-esteem because we don't know where we came from, and we don't have that internal feeling of value. And I want to say that kind of ties into the point that you, John L. and JD said, is like, why do, basically, how do we get here? And I think it's a little bit of an internal piece to where, like how JD said, when you meet another black person, you like, how you doing, brother? Like, I respect you. I love you. It's because the images that we've seen subconsciously permeate, and it makes us think lesser of our brothers, of our sisters. Like, I remember growing up, certain people would say, yeah, don't let a black guy work on your car because he'll break something else so that you have to come back to him so he can fix that. And, it's little elements like that that make you think, well, or, something you probably hear today, black owned businesses, they charge more for less. It's those subtle and minute things like that that
yep,
make us think less of one another. So that's why Asians buy from Asians, because that self-esteem, that internal thought of their Asian brother is not bad, right?
right.
They have a positive view.
And I'll say this to that point, Anthony, and I don't know if y'all noticed, I purposely don't call us black. Black is not a
Right.
race. Black is a color. All right. And the reason why, so white folks didn't become white until civil rights. When you watch the movie Django, and you remember the people who were working on the plantation that you could barely understand what they were saying, that were running the dogs, the white folks, right?
Yeah.
They called them white because they were mutts. They were mixed breeds of all different types of races. That's why they only called them white. But if you really go back in history and understand, like from Ellis Island to today, through the 70s and the 80s, America has become whitewashed, because prior to civil rights, America was not white. America was a nation of immigrants. Everybody was, oh, I'm an Italian American. I'm Irish American. I'm Polish American. Now, all these folks have dropped that initial thing, and now they just call themselves Americans. They want to do that to African Americans because, like you said, that inner peace, if you don't know where you came from, you have no idea what you can become. That's one of the reasons why I use my full name in a lot of situations, because my family has fought in every single war, conflict, skirmish this country has ever had since the Civil War. My family on my dad's side is from Nashville, Tennessee. They built the first black church in Nashville, Tennessee. My family has a school down in Nashville, Tennessee called the Smithson Craighead Academy. I ran into a very, just happenstance, a very top notable preacher at a baseball event when my son was about to go to college. We didn't know each other. Him and I are talking, very few African Americans in baseball. Him and I are talking, and he was like, "Oh, where you from? You look like somebody that I knew when I was young." Told him my family's from Nashville. He said, after we got to talking a little bit more, he was like, "Your uncle used to cut my hair. Your uncle had the only black barbershop down in Nashville, Tennessee." So I was always raised with through my family of that family lineage, that family history. And the power structure and the social engineering wants to divorce the African American from their lineage so they have nothing to compare themselves to. So they feel like they have nothing to grow from. So they have nothing to grow to. If and this is, you can take a cat and raise it around dogs and that cat will bark. That's true. That is because that
So
cat
I
raised around cats.
both of you, I think Anthony, you started it, and John L, you pretty much tapped it off. What I think is the crux of what is being done, and that's detaching us from that history. Because to your point, I thought about this the other day. On each side of my family, I can trace my lineage back to the 1700s.
Nice.
I know the first relative that touched shores on my mother's side and my father's side. And knowing that, not just knowing that, but sometimes you even know their stories. Knowing that gives you a confidence about who you are that, like I said, I've been in corporate America for 25 years. It's been rooms I've been in. I'm the only black man looking at, people staring at me. And if you don't have a sense of who you are in those rooms, you defer, right? You're scared to assert yourself. You don't feel confident in what you're saying, even if what you're saying is right. And I think when there's this effort to detach us from where we come from, that is the root of what you talked about, that Anthony, that lack of, you said,
Self-confidence.
Self-esteem.
yes, that self-confidence, because you don't know where you got it from. You like, I
Mhm.
have this gift, I don't even know where it came from. You know what I mean? I don't even, you know what I mean? Like, even with our broken families, right? I think that has an effect on us because you have a whole side of you don't know where it come from. You know what I mean? And so you go your whole life feeling like you have all of this stuff, but you can't connect it to anything. And and so now you're looking for answers, and unfortunately, they're ready to give us the answers, which are the wrong answers. And so, I truly believe that I think this conversation hit on something in terms of connecting us to who we are. And I think that's an individual journey, right? For all of us, because we mix with a whole lot of stuff. I know my family is, but also collectively, right? We have to uh just break away from what we've been told in terms of who we are, right? And where we come from, and really, really detach. I have four boys, right? I'm married. I got four sons. It's very important for me that they know their real history. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what they tell you in school. We're gonna really, our history started before 1600s, right? There was a whole lot going on before that, but that self confidence doesn't make you think, okay, well, my people used to be a slave, and that's where our history started from, because it's bigger than that. And I think when you have that inner confidence, right? That type of peace helps you throughout life. Because this is, to me, this conversation is bigger than just money, even though I think our economics is important, right? They can't pay us enough for what has been done to us psychologically and emotionally. And so that type of healing, because if they just write us a bunch of checks right now, then we just a bunch of rich business partners, right? We're still detached. If we can't truly heal the source of where we come from and heal ourselves and free ourselves from their expectations, then to me, the money is irrelevant. right? Because we're never going to fix the problems in our community. So, I think a big part of that is connecting to who we are both on our individual journeys, but as a collective community, so that we can have that subconscious cooperation of, I got you. You know what I mean? I understand without us even having to talk about
And JD, you bring up a very good point. And like I said, I have my own podcast. I'm not going to do a shameless plug. I'm definitely not. I'll leave that
Go
name.
ahead.
No, 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 no. This isn't about that. I just want to make a point that I did an episode on reparations. And one of the things that I talked about directly was the word reparations. The first part of that word is repair. And like JD said, you can't just give us or give folks, I don't want to say us, because I'm not going to put us in a trick bag of not being mentally astute enough to be able to move forward. But you cannot give a person who has limited knowledge money. You can't do that, because all you're going to do is make somebody who's going to be very poor very quickly. Look at people who win the lottery. One of my guilty pleasures is that show, The Lottery Ruined My Life, right? And these people are broke within 5 years because they have no understanding of what to do with that money, right? So back to the word reparations, and that beginning part of that word which is repair. We're all different human beings on this. Well, like Arkeem and Anthony, y'all come from the same ilk. So, but for the most part, we're all different human beings, right? So if we don't even know from whence we came, I don't know where the heck I'm going. So I had said in that episode that the first thing that needs to occur is to take a step back and say, okay, for all African Americans that are here in the country, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do an African DNA ancestry, because you need to know where you came from. Like my mom's side of the family originated in Cameroon, Africa. So I know that, right? So I know things about the people from Cameroon that fit some of my tendencies. So I know where I got that from, right? My dad's side of my family, although we can trace it back in the United States a little bit further than my mom's side, I know that the woman who birthed my great grandfather was a 24-year-old slave that got pregnant by the slave master. I know that back in 1819, right? So this is what I know. So therefore, from whence I came, I can continue to travel, and I can continue to grow, and I can continue to elevate. All the things that my family have done, I know I can do as well, because we share the same blood. Divorcing us from who we are, which is why there's no orphanage in this country that was built for African Americans. Every orphanage in this country was built for white folks. And you think about when African Americans were able to get into, after civil rights or during the civil rights era, they were able to get into public housing assistance or public assistance welfare, right? Prior to that, the man could be in the home because it was all white people. Once civil rights happened and African Americans could get on welfare, they removed that and said males can no longer be in the home. They did that specifically in order to divorce the African American male child from his father. They did that specifically to divorce the African American female child from her father. Because as we both know, or JD and I don't know, Arkeem, if you and Anthony are parents, but JD and I are, you got 4 boys, I got 2 girls and a boy. I know how important I am in their life to help guide them down the right path. And so I love hip hop, loved hip hop since it started. And I remember when hip hop took the turn to gangster rap and those sort of things, my mom was like, that crap is garbage, right? Like, it's not true. Nobody shot up 15 people, went home and, had a bowl of cereal, right? It's entertainment. like that's just the long and short of it. But think about if my mom didn't do that and help place that narrative in my mind that this is entertainment. There are so many folks, not just African Americans, which is why, like you said, JD, when the hip hop assault on hip hop started, the reason why it started, it wasn't because of African Americans. It was because hip hop made it to the suburbs and these little white kids were listening to it. So that's when they wanted to rein it in. It had nothing to do with us. It had nothing to do with it damaging us. And so now you see from, like JD said, 95, think about how many white cats that were listening to hip hop in the 80s or even the early 90s versus now today. And the reason being is because it proliferated everything. And so that's when they wanted to control it. And in order to control it, they said, we can't let it be the X clans and the Public Enemies and the rapper Paris. And we can't let it be that because this is reaching the suburbs. We have to show a caricature of African Americans. So we're going to push the negative side of hip hop because it's already in the suburbs. And hopefully pushing that negative side of hip hop will keep our little white kids from listening to it. And if they do listen to it, they're going to be afraid of black kids or African American kids. So once they get older, they're going to be able to continue this social engineering and this systematic racism, because there are a lot of people my age that are white that love hip hop but hate African Americans. They will recite they will recite some Run DMC as they're taking your black ass to jail. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
So,
Yeah.
it's
and
just the truth.
I'll say this real quick as my criticism for our role in that, because I think we let that voice take over. Like, for instance, there was a time when we used to condemn that kind of stuff. I give you a perfect example, the black church. And then the black church, then I started inviting all the dope dealers in and putting them on the front row. You know what I mean? And like it's almost like we accepted because it was so much money being made. You know what? Come on in, and then we lowered the standard to just normalize it. It was one time where we, even though, okay, yeah, this sound good, but you know what? This ain't right. We're not gonna let y'all play this here, right? We're not gonna play. And then we just opened the floodgates and we started inviting them to the White House. We started letting the church, letting them come and talk at church because because you signed a $100 million contract, now suddenly your morality is not in question and you can come and lead our people. And we started allowing the moral standard to drop as the financial standard increased. And a small group of people who made a whole lot of money, now no matter what they did morally, no matter what type of lifestyle they live, we elevated them because of the money that they were making. And now we have our children emulating that, knowing they're never going to make that kind of money, but they're emulating that whole lifestyle and that culture because we elevated those people above the people who had the moral authority. In the 70s and 80s, there were intellectuals in our community that had more cachet than the rappers.
True.
Yeah.
There were
Yeah.
people who were thought leaders who we would go to before we say, okay, well, let me give this dude a mic, even though he didn't spend 10 years in jail, but he came out and flipped that and did these deals and made $100 million. So let's give him the mic and ask him how we should be living, as opposed to this person who's been in the community doing this. And so I do give us some blame for that. Again, especially some of our leaders, because we took the money, for lack of a better, a better way to say it.
Yeah.
That's
And I want to let me touch on something. So something that you guys were talking about earlier. So reparations actually was simulated during the pandemic. That's how I kind of look at it. Except it wasn't just black people, it was all people. And though when those trillions of dollars came down from the government, you saw NFTs, digital pictures skyrocket to crazy valuations. You saw cryptocurrencies that didn't have any value skyrocket. And you also saw corporate profits skyrocket as well. That is a microcosm of what would happen if you give money to people that aren't financially literate. They'll just give it right back to the institutions and those institutions will take it and keep it and harness it as real wealth.
Mhm.
So that's number one. Number two, I want to touch on what you were just saying, JD, is I was having a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and there's this mayor. Oddly enough, well, I won't say the city, but there was a picture of a mayor, um, and he was dressed in clothing that you wouldn't expect a mayor to be wearing. But he's also an attorney. And somebody made the comment about, man, why would a mayor dress that way? And what I said was, because there used to be an image of, like, if you said a mayor looks like this, an engineer looks like this, a doctor looks like this, the image was usually a white man, right? And over time, other people have said, well, an engineer doesn't have to look like that. An engineer can look like this. A doctor can look like this. And with that diversity, unfortunately, standards dropped with it, right? Decorum dropped with those barriers and images of just being white men. So that was sort of my response to you, JD, and I'll pass to you, Arkin.
Hmm.
For sure.
Um, I was just piggybacking off of what JD said about having thought leaders other than somebody who just has money. If you go and look at the white community, it seems like our biggest rapper would be, I guess, would be Jay-Z right now, or a Drake or Lil Wayne, and it's like we kind of hold them we hold them as to speak for the black community in some sense when they have no credentials to, right? But if you flip it right over to the white community, Eminem is not a prolific thought leader for them at all.
Exactly.
For the Chinese community, Yao Ming is not a prolific thought leader. They will not ask him anything about politics whatsoever. Macklemore, any of their white rappers, they just see him as a rapper. But
Exactly.
yeah, and even Malcolm X spoke about that once before. Yeah, he said that just because somebody is an athlete or or a musician, that they shouldn't necessarily be able to represent our community because you're good at basketball. That don't mean you know anything about finance. But we have this thing. I've even seen it in my own family that just because one person would have money or well off, they kind of assume he good at everything.
Right.
But yeah, but he not. He's good at that
Right.
one
Right.
particular thing. Yeah, he's good at that one particular thing, and
Right.
that's what he's proficient at.
And this is the thing I learned too, right? When you're, and I don't know why we do this, but for whatever reason, when we are gifted at something, we separate our most gifted, right? If a
We
kid is
separate them or
gifted,
aren't we separated?
as a community, if a child is gifted, then guess what? We go put them in the white school. If a child is gifted athletically, we go set him up and put him on a path to work with the outside community. And we separate our most gifted from one another. And so, and I was an athlete, and I played college basketball. I was a scholarship athlete. And so, the criticism is through experience. But a lot of times when our athletes and entertainers have that gift, they don't have the same black experience because the other communities around them, they see that gift before we even see it a lot of times. I can't tell you how many young athletes that I see in high school, and guess what? A white family will go pick this kid is 12 years old, 6'7". The white family will go adopt him
The
and
blood
raise
side.
him up. You know what I mean? And so my point is, they don't have the same experience. And so when they get $100 million, they're like, "Oh man, there's no racism. What are you talking about? Yeah, everybody's good." You know what I mean? Because you can see their gift, and those outside communities see that talent, and they don't give them the same experience or perception that or the average black man that has to just come up on his own has. But then we give them the microphone, and they speak for us without having had to go through those same type of experiences.
Again, I love using movies and old shows to prove my point. There was a movie called Trick Baby. Has anybody ever heard of that?
I
No, I
never heard
haven't.
of that.
I think so.
It came out in 1972. All right, and there is a famous scene. It's a dinner table scene, and it's all these white people. And they talked about exactly what you're talking about right now, JD, where what they do that purposefully in order they want to pluck out the best and then make that best feel like. Now, I grew up, like I said, in the 70s, went to all white schools for the early part of my life, private schools. And I could tell you if I had a penny for every time I heard growing up, you're one of the good ones, right? And my family's so Afrocentric and so very proud to be African Americans. I remember one of the first times I told my dad that, he was like, "You let them know you're, you know, we're all the good ones. It's not just you." Because they try. Because let's look at it from this perspective. Like Arkeem said about the experiment with the rats, right? If you take all those rats and you put them in there, and then you pull one rat out and put him in a cage right next to the other rats, right? That rat is going to, and you feed him abundantly and you treat him better. That rat is going to be like, "Oh, well, I'm better than him. The people feeding me see something more in me than what those other rats have. So I'm not like those other rats." So now they put him back in the cage to speak to the rats. And he's like, "Oh, all y'all got to do is act right. They'll feed you better. All you got to do is do this." And they wanted the social engineering in the system wanted to take that small 1%. Because let's just be honest. If you're a professional athlete or you're a professional entertainer, you're a part of the 1%, right? So they want to take that 1% and pull it out in order to sit there and say, this is all you can aspire to be, either an entertainer or an athlete. And because that path is so narrow, like I talked about earlier, it creates greater competition within our community. So now I love football and I cannot stand Tom Brady. I cannot stand Tom Brady. I'll say that a third, cannot stand him, right? But let's look at the African American quarterbacks that were in the league at the same time he was blowing up. And go back and look, and it'll amaze you how hard the African American linebacker, the African American defensive end was crushing the African American quarterback. But Tom Brady, this is before the Brady rules even came out. And other white quarterbacks, they treated the exact same way because it is ingrained that, oh, well, when I played football, I was trying to take their head off because I got sick of being called the N-word Monday through Thursday, and on Friday they're cheering for me. So anytime I got a chance to unload on them, best believe I was knocking the snot out their nose. But at the end of the day, they pluck out the ones that they feel as though are the least threatening and the ones that they can control the most. So therefore, that person they can hold on high, and then that person can then talk down to everybody else that looks like him. Everybody else that looks like him.
So then the question is,
Right, because what do they say? All you got to do is work harder. Well, let me see. I am the top in my class, but how much harder can I work when I'm going and I'm only eating 2 days a week? I am trying to do the right thing, but how can I continue to do the right thing when I got fired from my job and I'm coming home and I got 3 babies in there crying? You see what I'm saying? So it's that social engineering. And so now the person starts looking in the mirror thinking they're worth less, right? Because I tried to do it the right way. There are more people who end up in jail who are intelligent, athletes, whatever, like they had it going on. They had it going in the right direction. And then they get derailed and they can't climb out of that hole that they were, that they fell in. And I'll give you this one. Everybody talks about marijuana right now, marijuana being legal and so on and so forth. The whole purpose behind marijuana first, started with medical marijuana and then recreational marijuana was because white kids were getting kicked out of college and not being allowed into college. That was the whole antithesis behind legalizing marijuana. It had nothing to do with anything else. Because if you think back in the 90s, you filled out a college application. It said, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Have you ever been convicted of selling or using drugs? And marijuana back then was still labeled as a drug. So you check yes, you can't get into college. So if you think about it from that perspective and then zoom out, I'm a type of person, I like to walk things back 3 steps, right? I like to get at the end and then walk it back 3 steps to figure out where did it start from. I think it gives a more clear picture of the solution that you can put into place for the problem that is at hand. And JD, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you at all, but they do it purposefully. So if I can't play the saxophone and all they show me is only successful people in the world are saxophone players, and I can't hold a tune, I'm going to have a very low opinion of myself. It's that social engineering, and it's so powerful. All we have to do is flip that social engineering paradigm on its ear, the same way it was prior to civil rights, when the African American community was extraordinarily tight knit. Since civil rights has passed, it has been the power structure's goal through COINTELPRO, like you mentioned, JD, and several others, mass incarceration, the crack up, it's all been to fracture the African American community.
Okay.
So you had a
Yeah, go
thought?
go ahead, JD. I was gonna say, you were gonna say you were leading off with, so the question is.
I lost that thought, but I'm solutions based, right? And so, yeah, of course, I think all of us have a clear idea of the problem, right? And how it started, where we are now. And so, as far as the solution, like I think about the future a lot, right? And in terms of us reversing that, number one, I think that generationally, it starts with, you said this at the very beginning, John L, with our young people, right? A 10-year-old today is a 20-year-old grown man in 10 years, right? And the way the statistics work right now, 85% of our young men and women cannot read or do math above a sixth grade level. And so the way I look at it is everything that we're fighting for is going to be meaningless if 80 to 85% of our young people aren't going to be able to take advantage of it because they can't even do basic communication. They're going to relegate themselves to trading their time for money for the rest of their lives. And so if we aren't investing our time and our resources in our young people right now, then 10 years, we're going to be talking about the same things, right? I think, and I don't hear any of our black leaders even talking about that. But I think as far as what responsibility we have and what I within my own community do, I think that's a number one priority, right? There are less than a half a million black men in prison right now in the whole country. So the narrative that, we are criminals is just completely false, right? That's less than a half a percent of our population.
Also, the most exonerated too.
Exactly.
Exactly. So you can flip that number right down even more so. So I refuse to take that narrative, but even if we're not criminals, we're not excelling in our economics because like I said in the beginning, we all trying to do it by ourselves. So I think number one, we should be prioritizing on our young people because again, 10 years gets here fast, it's super fast. And if they don't have the basics, they're not going to be able to catch up with artificial intelligence and all of the things that are happening in terms of how you can make money in this new age. But the second thing is for those of us who have, some type of mobility, we have to find a way to synthesize and synergize, right? We can't keep doing it by ourselves. We're only going to be able to get so far. And so we need to be able to create systems where we can share resources, where we can create just pipelines outside of their main system. To give you an example, right? I mean, in Houston, I don't know how many black restaurants they have, right? Why are we not all buying the meat from the same black farmers? right? To bring the prices down and to shut the other people out the system. Right? Why can't somebody create a restaurant supply company where we buying all of the same, supplies, the cups and so and I'm just throwing this stuff out as ideas, but my point is if we know the problem now, 30 years ago, we didn't know that they was pumping crap in our community.
Right.
Now we do. And so we have less of an excuse to take the reins by ourselves instead of waiting for other people to come in and pass a law or pass legislation that's never really going to get manifested if we not on the ground making our own changes, you know what I mean, in our own community. And so for people like ourselves who figured out, okay, we know how to make some money ourselves, right? I don't think we have a problem making money. We know how to hustle. The problem is building wealth. It's controlling it, it's protecting it. 95% of the businesses in our community don't have employees. We have 3 million businesses, and 95% of them are just single owner businesses, right? I start a business and it don't matter if I become a multi-millionaire. If it's just me, the value of that business dies with me. And so how do we protect and harness the value of what we have individually? And then how do us as wealth creators, that have figured out how to do some things, how do we connect and then permeate that through the next generation? So we multiply us so that we not just a one-off, so that I'm not just an anomaly. So there's 100 more of me that's coming behind us. This is just normal for them. You know what I mean? So I think that kind of connection is what we need to be thinking about and talking about. And then the last thing I'll say is, as far as economic opportunity, it's as wide open as it's ever been. Right? You can do anything. If you wake up in the morning, you can start any kind of business. You can get any kind of resource. So there's no excuses outside of what's just stopping us between our heads.
Well,
Yeah.
what
And
you just said about what's stopping us from working together. So, I guess I would say that I'm in the media. I'm pretty much I'm sort of important, and I'm somebody that somebody should sit down and talk to. I mean, because I can make something happen or I can make something not happen. I mean, I've seen myself do it 100 times. But the thing about being a black man stepping out into whatever industry or field it is, it's kind of like you viewed as competition by other blacks. Like as soon as you step out on the field, there is nobody that will take your hand and say, "Man, let me show you the ropes," or "Let me teach you something." No, it's like, "Oh, you coming out here? Well, let me try to get you as soon as you step out," or "Let me be predatory." And that's definitely my experience, pretty much on everything. When we started an app, it was like that from the jump. And that's the response we got from our people. Same thing in the media. It's like they don't really want to work with you, only they want to try to use you, or somebody sees you as direct competition and saying, how can I get him? How can I get him, get rid of him, or attack him? And that's the main problem. And if I'm having that experience, I'm sure others are too.
So what I would say to
Hakeem,
you
what
in
did I
that
say to you?
situation,
Sorry.
because I deal with that in my business, it's in high finance, it is less than 3% of us. So when I see another brother, I'm like, he got to be doing something. You know what I mean? So I understand. What I would say to that, number one, is you got to protect yourself and protect what you've built. Because we all really, at the end of the day, honestly, we all really in competition, right? Whether it's with us or with other groups of people. As men, we go out into the workspace and we're trying to assert ourselves professionally. The goal is hopefully we don't have to compete with each other and we can go out and compete with others. But I understand what you're saying because it's like the crabs in the barrel, right? We all trying to get it. And if I give him a out, then I might lose this opportunity. And so I understand what you're saying. So what I would say personally, number one, when you come into the battlefield, protect everything that you have. You know what I mean? And make sure that you insulate yourself, expecting that's just the way the business world is. But there are some of us, that don't think like that, and I think The thing that encourages me is that it doesn't take a majority of people to make change. It just takes a small minority of committed people that's doing the same thing consistently, right? That creates a tipping point. So you don't have to change the minds of the whole community. You have to have enough people that are committed to one cause to create a tipping point that changes the whole dynamic. You know what I mean? It don't take a whole lot of righteous people. I always say the righteous are more powerful than the wicked. The wicked are just more motivated.
There it is.
You
And
know what I
LP,
mean?
what did I say to you as soon as we got on and you told me what you do? What did I respond to you with? I need you to help me. I need to talk to you so I can grow my stuff. And JD, once I found out what you, because I've been in business development marketing space like since the 90s. Okay. And like with JD, with what he does, I know a couple people that's in that field as well. One person in particular who's just getting started. Offline, I was going to try to connect them with JD. You know what I mean? So he could talk to him, let him know what the landscape is, so on and so forth. Because I think one of the biggest misconceptions amongst men, I'm not even going to say African American men, but just men in general, is we have a hard time asking for help. We look upon asking somebody for help, be it if they're older than us, younger than us, because our king, you're much younger than me. You know what I mean? So for me to be able to set my pride aside and be like, hey, this guy's really doing it on a level that, I would like to ascend to one day. Let me get in his ear and see what he can teach me, see what he can do, see what he can instruct me, guide me towards, so on. And I think that is not necessarily an African American. I think that's a man thing starting off, right? Is we are so afraid to be vulnerable and just to open up and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I've been getting by and now I want to do more. How or can you help me? Is there some information you can impart upon to me? And that's one of the things, the industry that I'm in, one of the things that I've done, because I've been in this industry now for close to 20 years, I literally send my resume to people who are looking to get in my industry. And I tell them, use it as a template. You know what I mean? Cut out what doesn't apply, use the verbiage, and go with God, right? I'm here to help you and to be as because I didn't get where I am today without somebody helping me, both inside and outside of my family. So I think that whole reaching back, you know what I mean, to help somebody else, because we should all be looking to train 10 people to replace us through our youth. And JD, I love what you said. One of the biggest things that, my wife's an educator, she's a middle school principal. And one of the biggest things that I'm always preaching is, these young African American boys, some of them don't want to go to college. Preach those trades, preach that HVAC trade school, preach that, auto mechanic trade school, preach that electrician, preach that plumber, right? Give them something that is, help them and steer them in a way to something that is extraordinarily viable. And then as you go down through the educational levels, that's that high school message. Then that middle school message is, hey, let's be cognizant of our own body awareness. Let's be cognizant of our own mental awareness, right? Let's start with those things, because having pride in oneself and not being overly prideful are two different things, right? I can have pride in myself, make sure I'm dressed well, my pants aren't hanging off my butt. You know what I mean? I'm coming to school, I'm ready to learn, I'm focused, I'm engaged with the teacher, I'm here to get as much out of this as I possibly can. And then go down to the elementary school level and simply teach, especially young African American males, teach them the idea of asking for help and being vulnerable to learning something from your own peer is a beautiful thing. There was a
Right.
saying that when I was growing up that, was popular when especially my mom was growing up, but each one teach one. And so we can all reach everyone. Each one teach one. So I've taken, I actually do that. Anytime somebody like I have so many male friends who are always like, hey, thank you. You taught me how to do this better in my business. You taught me how to do this. You taught me how to, and I give it away for free, right? I don't charge. That's like I said, my podcast has been around for close to 10 years. I've never tried to monetize on it. And I talk not only about hip hop, I talk about politics, I talk about social justice, I talk about different things because I just want the information out there. I'm not trying to get rich off of teaching our king something, right? I'm not gatekeeping. And I think that's one of the biggest things within our culture is that
So
you know,
gatekeep.
so,
Yes.
imagine if you will, JD, and I'm just going to use you as an example because you're in high finance. Um, Imagine if every year you could have 10 middle school students that you mentor on how to take $5 a month and find a penny stock and invest it. Just to show them and teach them the benefit of that. So now at the end of the year, they had that $5, and now at the end of the year, it's Christmas time, they may have $400 or $500 that they can sit there and be like, look what I got to their friends. Right. And now that is what that causes it to spread. And, they use a term in cancer treatment called metastasizing. We want the positivityness of our culture to metastasize to each and every person within our culture. Because let's just face it, and this is something that a lot of people have glossed over. African Americans pretty much predict culture throughout the world. You have people on the continent of Africa, in Niger, Nigeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, who are emulating us. So if we are that powerful to have the whole world emulating us through culture, dance, clothing, whatever it may be, we can use that same power and not gatekeep it to uplift these young adults like JD and Arkeem and you, Anthony, were talking about. We can do that. But it
Yeah.
takes each one of us, like JD said, just reaching out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that was like one of the most important things about this conversation. That's why, it was so important to me that we sat here and why I invited my brother in is because when I saw your comment, I just knew that there was a wealth of knowledge there. And when I saw JD's comment, I said, there's something here that I can learn from these men. And that's why I invited my brother. I was like, man, this is going to be good. But what we've done here today, the conversation we've had here today is even better than I could have imagined. And I mean, I want to end it off here, but I do want to, touch back on what JD was saying about, we do need to network more. Every successful Black man does not need to be on an island. And if this call, serves as the starting point for something greater, if
Yeah.
because we can exchange phone numbers, talk about different things more, and try to build something better because we have the networks. Then this conversation could really sprout into something meaningful.
Yeah, because we've done it before. Like we don't get credit for it, but that attack on target came from us.
Nice.
Yeah,
Wow,
Nice.
that's what's up.
yeah, the attack on target came from me
Wow.
sitting right in this room, and I took a bear and I said, "You got to do it like the like the slave master, and grab him and hang him in front of the congregation and say, this what happened when you mess with us." And that's what blew up. And then some other guy, CEO guy, took credit for it, but the attack on target started right here on the Foul Out
Wow.
podcast. Yeah.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
what's up, man.
I'm down like 4 flat tires, and I will always say, if the Zeus's network can grow as fast as it grew with all that negativity, then what is his first name? His last name's Allen. I always call him the wrong
Byron
B.
Allen.
Yes, right? Then his
BuzzFeed.
network should have been quadruple what CBS and ABC and every other network. But because he's preaching positivity and that's not what the masses want to push, he isn't necessarily get in that pub. So our team, I really respect and appreciate what you're doing. I'm glad to hear that you started that Target boycott, because it was my wife doesn't do any of those things, right? She's very low key. She's much of an introvert, but when she saw that situation that went on at Target, literally, and she's like I'm ordering from Target, you know what I mean? So on and so forth. I mean, Target was her baby, right? She literally cut it off cold turkey. She's like, I ain't doing nothing with her. And so I'm very proud to be able to get off this call and be like, hey, I actually met the originator of that disease.
Yeah,
That's what's up.
but that's kind of like the essence of how we blew up. See, what we try to do is, I can't really explain the whole thing, it'll take forever. But what we try to do is, that's very positive, but it's said in this wild, overt, crazy way that people want, you know what I mean? Like, because people really present bad news like that, right? But like
Right.
I was saying, hang them like the slave master. See, that's what shakes up the mind. But then I'm actually giving you game on what to do. And then a lot of
Amen.
people shorted stocks because of that. And I was one of them, you know, because when we saw that, but yeah, it's a few other things that we really kicked out there. But like I said, it'll take a long time for me to explain all of it. But
Well, I will
that's
say it
really
first. I
what you have.
welcome opportunity. I said, I'll say it first. I welcome any opportunity to kick it with you brothers again, whether it's,
100%.
whether it's in this format or a behind the scenes format, in order to bring some positive change within our culture that's going to be sustainable, because that's what we need.
And all I'll say is, man, this is a conversation I love having. I hope y'all heard my passion in the stuff I talk about, because this is stuff I talk about all the time. And my podcast is called The Wealth Mindset with JD Garnier, and I really touch on a lot of this stuff I dripped on, man. And um, one of the things I do here in Houston is have a Black men's breakfast every month, and we talk about these types of things and how we can help one another, right, in different industries. And my goal is, anytime I'm doing a deal, if I need an attorney, if I need a CPA, if I need somebody in construction, or real, I want one of my people to eat off that. You know what I mean? I don't want to have to go and get, a big law firm or somebody I don't know to benefit off of that. I want my own to benefit off of that, so that we all, a rising tide lifts all ships.
Amen to
You know
that.
what I mean? And so, that's the type of synergy I'm talking about, across industries, across businesses. You know what I mean? And eventually the goal is that goes without saying. You know what I mean? And then we just an economic tide that they can't stop. But in the beginning, we have to be very deliberate and purposeful about it. And I think having these conversations publicly and controlling our narrative in the media is a big part of it, right? Because there's a whole nother side than what they like to show, you know what I mean, on the shade room and world stuff.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Absolutely. And
We're actually in Austin, Texas.
yeah, we're in
That's what's
Austin.
up.
Yeah,
That's
we
what's up, man. Okay. All right. No, that's cool.
yeah.
Okay.
And
We
and I mean, since everybody kind of speaking on their professions, I'm a software engineer, so any software needs you have, I'm here to offer guidance. I can build the apps myself. So
Nice,
it's
nice.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah
I'll
we
definitely tell you what I do off camera or off recording.
Sure thing.
yeah
Okay. Well, let me close it here, and we can stay on and chat a little bit more. So yeah,
right.
appreciate you guys for joining. This has been a very valuable conversation. Um, Foul Out Podcast, man. We'll see y'all next week.